Hi everyone and welcome to episode 55 of the ITSM crowd. My name's Claire Agutter. I'm going to be your host for today and I'm joined by a fabulous panel. We've got Jon Hall, we've got Simon Kent and we've got Simone Moore. Our topic today is swarming, which is I guess not brand new, but a relatively new approach to how we fix things when things go wrong. And we're just going to kind of dig into it a little bit, find out more about it, and give you some tips if this is something that you're looking at in your own organisation. So the first thing that I'm going to do is ask the panel to introduce themselves. So working from left to right on my screen, Jon, if you could say hello first, please.
Hi there, I'm Jon Hall. I'm a senior product manager at BMC, mainly on our ITSM lines.
Thank you very much. And Simon?
Hi there, I'm Simon Kent. I'm the founder and owner of Quantum 21. We specialise in strategic business relationship management and digital transformations. Thank you. Hello.
Thank you very much. And Simone?
Hi, all the official stuff is actually on LinkedIn, so you can read away to your heart's content there. My main focus, especially as an independent, is really about the thought leadership side and cracking open how business and IT tick and helping that along so it ticks better.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If you are watching us live, we will be keeping an eye out for questions on Twitter. So if you've got something that you'd like to ask the panel today, pop the question onto Twitter, use the hashtag ITSMcrowd, and we will pick it up. We'll also be providing a blog at the end of the session, which is going to have some links to some further reading. So you'll be able to find that on the ITSM Zone website. So I'm going to come to you first of all, Jon, because you are probably the kind of the most prolific writer about swarming. You were certainly the one who brought it to my attention. Please, could you tell us a little bit about what swarming is and why it's different to how we work at the moment?
Sure. Swarming as an organizational concept, really, I'd say is about bringing together people in a dynamic way and collaborative way to respond to situations. And so if we extend that to IT support, and in fact customer support in general, one of the main things you'll see with swarming is that the concept is really that we instead of using tiered support, so a frontline team, a second line team for escalations, perhaps a third line team of specialists, we try and replace that with a much more flexible structure where people come together as necessary to resolve issues. And so rather than things having to be bounced from one queue to another to progress them, the people who are in, the people who might be assigning it to each other and putting it in each other's silos are actually bringing themselves together into dynamic groups to work on it.
And what's driving this kind of shift to a new approach?
There's probably quite a few things. One of the things we might argue is that although the tiered support system has been very ubiquitous in customer support in general for a long time, it has some really significant drawbacks. So as a customer, if I'm logging an issue, hopefully I can resolve it on the front line. And let's face it, I think ITSM has done a really great job of building great capabilities in each of these levels, and in particular at the front line. But if that front line can't resolve it, they have to then escalate it to the second line team, and they'll have a go. And if their slightly more specialized skills can't resolve it, they'll assign it to another team. And the trouble is, at each of these points, we're kind of putting it in another queue and another queue. And one of the things that's really changed in our industry since the establishment of this and the real normalization of this practice has been the development of agile thinking. Underpinned by lean culture, of course, and one of the things that's really seen as a very bad thing by agile thinking is queues of unfinished work in progress. So one of the most fundamental reasons that I think swarming is coming to prominence in place of the tiered support model is that it's a perception that tiered support fundamentally has some issues that are contrary to a lot of the beliefs of the agile movement.
Okay, and Simon, I'll bring you in at this point because you're focused on business relationship management. Is this something that you see a need for at the strategic level?
I think so. I think one of the things that I'm curious about with the swarming sort of model that Jon's describing, and there's two aspects that I've seen is that from my own perspective of being in that customer facing, customer experience senior role, my focus in the organization and the team that I was responsible for clearly had customer first in our minds. So I really could see how this would be really beneficial to be able to pull in different resources really when you needed them, as opposed to pushing an issue down a queue and kind of feeling, even from an internal perspective, when you're providing that customer support, you really did feel like, I've kind of thrown this into a black hole and I hope it comes back sometime, you know, and that wasn't very good feeling from a customer support and customer experience standpoint. But the flip side is that often you see, well, what's driving the overarching business? Is it what we really want it to be and philosophically want it to be, which is customer experience, or is it often a reality of shareholder value, which is based on quarter by quarter by quarter, based on revenue, and shifting new product releases out of the door? And so you get some conflicting internal challenges. Unfortunately, that's the reality. And it's which challenge wins over, which driver really wins over, I think is going to be a significant influence in where this can go. I don't know if Jon's got any commentary on that, but it's just a thought that comes to my mind and what I've experienced.
It's an interesting point. I mean, it's certainly, I think there's often been a perception in our industry that we needed to have certain process-driven structures. I think you've had Peter Johnson on this top podcast before, and he talks a lot about the management culture, particularly the 80s and 90s, where managers produced wonderful flows and they kind of tuned the flows, and the people involved in the process were just cogs in that process. And so there's certainly perception that if you do things differently, there's you might be spending more money to do so. You might be breaking the system in a dangerous way. And it is an interesting challenge that advocates of swarming come up against in their organization. Myself, I'm not sure it's that true. I mean, where I've seen this done, often the results are better. You get kind of beneficial results across the whole spectrum, across the whole scorecard. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge to be able to kind of break out from very established systems without creating the risk, or at least the perception of risk, that things are going to be, antithetical to, like you say, shareholder value at the same time.
Yeah, and Simone, I'll bring you in at this point as well, because you are the mixologist, famously, and a lot of your focus is kind of the impact on people and skills. So, what appeals to you about swarming?
Well, I think what it is, it's almost like, I think swarming has become more acceptable, I guess, even from conceptual thinking perspective of the linear type organizations, because what I'm finding is some of them getting better at knowledge management now, with that huge focus we've had about that whole shift left in getting the knowledge as close to the customer asking the question as possible, has actually helped to change some of the underneath culture in the silos, the us and them about, well, if you go to level 2, they're smarter, and go to level 3, they're supposed to be smarter again. But that's actually not quite the case. I think some of the attitudes are actually changing now through the better knowledge management processes and implementations around the culture of that and how we see knowledge and use knowledge, because it's becoming more engaging. It's the skill set side of it, by having all the tiers involved in the knowledge, both the creation and use and reuse, etc. In doing that, they're already cross-pollinating. They're actually increasing the capability of the teams across the enterprise, not just within their own little habitat. So it has gone beyond just Service Desk having a knowledge article. So I think that has led in some ways to swarming being more part of the conversation now. And the other thing that I see, especially having come from service management side of the business and call centers, etc., is that where desktop teams, for example, used to be level 2 only and not part of the support centre, they're actually being part of the support centre. Even the teams and the team managers are now reporting through to a single manager. So we're now getting more than one team involved, I guess, at that front end. And they're starting to become more engagement teams as opposed to just, oh, you're level 1 or you're level 2 now. So even the nomenclatures, if we can remove some of the nomenclatures, just the way people label and see those skill sets and where they sit in the organisation, swarming starts to become a little bit more understandable. That collaborative nature builds more. And that's what I'm seeing, is progression towards that now. And that's really enjoyable. But I still come back to, there has to be a really good quality skills matrix and understanding of what the capability is in the organisation, so that we can actually facilitate and assist where those skill sets will drop in, help assist that collaboration, so people understand, well, who can I talk to, or who can I ask, or where does this knowledge sit? So knowledge becomes our product rather than the actual item.
I think it's no coincidence that one of the organizations that's probably done the most to encapsulate swarming in the service management context is the Consortium for Service Innovation. And of course, their two main initiatives arguably are knowledge-centered service, I should say now, and intelligent swarming, as they frame it. And so those two things together, as you say, are about, what is KCS? KCS is about making knowledge management a collaborative process that involves the whole support organization and gradually pushes knowledge effectively up what would be the tiers of support, and enables better self-service, better frontline service, avoidance of fixing the same problem over and over again. And at the same time, the same organization has wrapped around the concept of swarming, which again is fundamentally collaborative. At BMC, when we have certain different types of swarm, but I think one of the most interesting ones is what gets called generally the dispatch swarm. Some teams call it the triage swarm. They're very self-organizing, another characteristic of swarming, so the names can vary. But that essentially is pairing together people who would normally be in the front line with people who would be in second line, more experienced, less experienced. And the skills transfer happens as part of that day-to-day activity. And interestingly, it happens both ways. One of my favorite comments from BMC was one of our support people who's been working on the Remedy and ITSM product lines for a very long time, a good decade. And you'd think these people couldn't really be taught anymore. He told me that in a year he doubled his knowledge after they started performing. So that is absolutely fundamental. It's a really great way of bringing together people who might not normally be face-to-face sharing knowledge, and taking away that knowledge. So instead of knowledge transfer having to be disseminated in some terse plain text in a ticket log, it's happening all the time.
It's a natural upskilling.
Yeah,
that's what I love about it.
It's also that dissemination of knowledge through experience as well, because somebody who has hasn't got the particular skill or the experience or the exposure to a particular situation, who is sitting with somebody who has, that doesn't come in the form, as Simone was saying, that doesn't necessarily come in the form of a knowledge article. It just comes in the form through that collaborative conversation, or this is the experience that we're both faced with. Let's solve it. Let's deal with it. And that's when you really learn. So I think the concept and seeing it played out is tremendous. I think it's a really amazing opportunity for everybody to embrace. I think the challenge, which is back to the strategic question again, is getting buy-in at leadership.
Yeah, we have to enable. I think part of it, Jon was right at the beginning. There are certain things that have happened with Agile and DevOps and the cultural aspect of the way that works, that allowing people that freedom, that safe, psychological safe space to say, no, it's actually okay if you go and talk to these other teams. It's okay if you actually put in a phone call to say, I don't know, Singapore office, because that's where the knowledge happened to be. And I often liken swarming to be I don't know if how many of you guys have seen it, but we talk a lot about the ER rooms of hospitals, but the same thing happens in surgeries. You look at the incredible thing that technology does now with allowing, video, if you like to use the term very loosely, but within the surgery for half a dozen doctors to be watching and advising the doctor that's physically with the patient. I mean, that's swarming. They can call the senior doctor in Switzerland and have the guy from South Africa, and and they're all in the surgery with him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or her, for that matter.
And that's an interesting one, because I did a little bit of work recently around the Cynefin framework, which I'm sure is another conversation in itself, but in particular about what it says about how complex problems need to be addressed. And where complex is defined as there being no clear correlation between a cause and an effect, and hence Dave Snowden's work on Cynefin is fascinating, because it talks about parallel safe to fail experiments to gradually get a better understanding of the unique situation you're in. I put some stuff out about that, and the medical profession. I had people from the medical profession talking about it. It turns out Cynefin is a very big subject there as well, for exactly the same reason, because they have also been in a very waterfally linear work paradigm, where, and I'm sure we've all experienced it. You have one set of consultations, then you get to another, and your notes hopefully follow, and you have that linear path through a medical situation. And actually, there is now a growing swarming-like movement in the medical profession, as you say, to make it much more conversational rather than pass the parcel.
Yeah, I think part of the reason for the tiered movement that we have in service management has actually come from those older professions as well, because they very much had the structure from the general practitioner into the expertise areas and so on and so forth. So they did have a natural siloed effect, because that's the way their knowledge was domained. You can't know everything. It was just purely impossible. So that's how they ended up with these siloed knowledge domains. Oh, I'll pass it over to the expert in that area. But now it's actually become, that patient focus is, well, really, we're curious. We really want to figure out what's going on with this person. We can't figure out what's happening. Who has any ideas to throw into, questions and ideas that they can throw into the mix? And I think that's where now the medical profession is a lot more open to having mixed experts within the one call now. It's patients. That's their value outcome, and which is what swarming's really about, is the value outcome. So
I'd like us to kind of dig a little bit more into the kind of the practicalities of swarming. And I think one of the questions that came to me immediately, Jon, was, do you need a level of kind of stability within the organisation for this to work? Because I can kind of see conflicting ends of the spectrum. So the desire to shift to a swarming model, but equally, if you're working in quite an unstable environment, is there a danger that you're just going to sort of drown your teams with unplanned work?
I'm not sure. It's because I think probably in those unstable environments, they've already got huge queues that they're often unable to manage. I mean, we've all seen it, right? I think probably the stability that's most critical at the beginning is a management that's confident to let teams develop and organize their own practice. And I mean, I think this is where you see strong parallels with the DevOps movement, where again the DevOps came from practitioner upwards, and in my experience, swarming works best when it's the same, because that means management has to be able to kind of let go of its tight grip on certain things, and that's hard. That's particularly hard in cases where metrics that people are measured on or even build on in the service provider space are very much founded on linear process. So the main to me the main problem of stability is more about kind of executive confidence in their own people. If they feel there's not that trust and that stable relationship between executives and practitioners, then swarming's never even going to get off the ground.
Yeah. So from the business case perspective, what are the kind of the key organizational drivers for swarming?
I mean, I can certainly talk about the examples even at BMC and customer support. You know, we felt that, and this is the, you know, if you're using one of our products and you need to you need to raise an issue, and you're coming in potentially through our self-service and then onto our support teams, they felt that there was, you know, they wanted to improve some of the usual metrics, you know, the mean time to resolution, the customer satisfaction. You know, we're all incentivized on customer satisfaction across the company. Mm-hmm. And talking to the teams who pioneered this in the business, they felt that they kind of reached a point where it was hard through conventional optimization of the conventional tiered process to achieve those things. And so they were given, you know, bravely, I think, given the opportunity to try something new and pilot it in different teams. And so that was the measures, you know, as much as anything, the measures they were looking to address. You know, how can we improve our response times by taking fundamental delays out of the process? How can we increase that customer satisfaction? They achieved some really good results on those things, but also had a lot of these ancillary benefits coming out, like people being upskilled quicker and ready, you know, people getting up to being fully productive members of the support teams after being new hires. Mm-hmm. And even softer, you know, people really like it. So there's a certain employee satisfaction. You know, all the people involved, you talk to them and they're incredibly enthusiastic about it and talk about what a difference it's made. So for us, you know, that they set out to achieve a bunch of very measurable process and outcome measures, and gained a load of soft benefits as well. If we could call them soft benefit, only soft in terms of measurability, I think they're still very fundamentally important.
And I think that's probably what I really love about this as a new approach, is the fact that so many organizations, you hear them talking about consumer experience and user experience, but then when you actually engage with them, you are stuck in this horrific bureaucratic hellhole and you don't know what's going on and why. So the idea that when there is something wrong, the focus is immediately on the consumer, I absolutely love that. And I think, Simone, that probably speaks to a lot of the work you do as well.
It does. One of the things I've recently been doing a lot more activities around with the workshops and things is called relationship agility. And I think when we think about swarming, it really is about using your networks and you know, the collaboration across those networks that you have. How wide is your communication lines, or how deep your communication lines are throughout the organization. And interestingly, one of the things that you can do, and it's just an example, but a couple of organizations have really enjoyed this going about it this way, is they take the traditional org chart, which has your silos and everything in it. But what we want to do is we place, take one role, take one person, just as an example, and put them at the central point, because that's the issue is coming to them, whatever that issue might happen to be. And they get the center point. And what we do is we do a dotted line out to all the people that they interact with directly, and then put a secondary color to the people that they interact with indirectly. And what you start to do is you start to find a nexus. You start to find your collaboration nexus. So rather than going up and down the lines and I've got to go up to that manager and then across to this manager and get permission, can I really talk to the other team, and do I interrupt their workload and things, we actually look at what are the natural communication lines that they're already using, what are the influence lines that are there, and as such they can start to create what is their own unique model, if you like, their swarming nexus. And I like that, because you can take absolutely any role within that chart and it will form its own nexus, and then you'll start to see where the heavier lines are that are going all over the place. And you can then start taking advantage and looking at, well, how do I increase that collaboration on the weaker lines? How do we, you know, make it easier for these other lines to communicate? Because, I mean, you know, that's the whole thing. Once we can start to collaborate, we can have better conversations. Once we're having better conversations, we can start creating wider transparency and deeper trust. And that in itself starts to feed across the culture of the organisation. So, yeah, you know, thinking about how agile we are within our relationships, that's where the knowledge is sitting, is along those lines.
Yeah, and I guess that's that's a danger with swarming, just like there's a danger with Kanban and a lot of the other techniques, is there is a fundamental culture change that has to sit underneath this. We can't just say we're doing swarming this week. There's a lot that has to happen around it in terms of trust and relationship management. I
love that relationship agility, Simone. Love that. Really, really great. Can I just reflect back on some things I've just been hearing, though, like with Jon, with BMC, I think it is so important. And this comes back to that leadership and that trust that comes down from leadership, but it's also and confidence. I think you described it as a confidence that sort of comes down from leadership, but it's also confidence. Leadership has confidence in itself and sets the agenda, because that's how it all works, right? We have to see leaders lead and setting the agenda. And I think one of the things that in BMC that to me really is one of the facilitators of how swarming can really work at BMC is that you said everyone is measured on customer satisfaction. Everyone. That's a huge thing. So, because when you've got conflicting measures across different areas of the organization that aren't all tied back to that customer experience, customer sat, then you're going to get the desire to be able to call upon your colleagues in the network, but they themselves are driven by different drivers. They themselves are going, yeah, but I can't because I've got these other drivers. I'm being measured by these other things. But so to have that consistent measurement across the board, that everybody is measured by customer satisfaction or customer experience, is amazing. And the other thing that I've picked up on was you said that actually employees like it. And I love the work from folks like Happy Signals, who have really done a lot of work around what does it take in terms of employee satisfaction and employee engagement, and how does that sit at the center. And we've been talking about it for years, but I think they've got the metrics now that says having that at the center then drives customer engagement and customer satisfaction and experience. And I think everything that this swarming is about plays to that. And I think those things all being in place are critical. And ultimately, it comes back to that leadership thing again.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, oh, sorry, Jon.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I was thinking a lot then about Karen Ferris's work around, the way we look at change, the way we feel, that change is everyone's responsibility. But one of the interesting things that, managers have been taught to manage, and in a very linear way, it's their mini space that they have to control, their measurements, their KPIs, what they have to, abide by. Those are the things that if we can start changing those. But nobody's ever really taught the managers to be a facilitator or be a coach, which is something that swarming really requires. The leader does have to trust, not just in their team, but they do have to trust in their own ability to not interfere. They have to trust in their own ability to let go. And that can be very difficult when they've been so inculcated in the other way of working. And you're right, their metrics have to change as well. And start rewarding people on their engagement and the actual outcome, as opposed to these activities that occur in a process.
Right.
We're coming up to the end of our time here. We could go on, but we generally find that 30 minutes is the best length for these. Jon, where can people find out more information?
Yeah, well, we've got some blog articles about swarming on the BMC website. I've also got my some slightly longer articles on my Medium site, which I believe you're going to link. That's an interesting starting point. Of course, the Consortium for Service Innovation has an excellent set of resources. They've published recently a whole detailed framework about their intelligent swarming model, and that's really as definitive as you can get in terms of the way it's understood and modeled in our sector. So those are two really good places to start, I think.
Fantastic. So we will put a blog up on the ITSM Zone website today. We will give you some links to Jon's articles, to the BMC blog, and the Consortium for Service Innovation today. thank you to Jon, to Simone, to Simon. That's been a really entertaining discussion, and I'm looking forward to seeing Swarming evolve more and more as it is picked up more widely. Our next episode of the ITSM Crowd is on the 27th of June. It's 6 p.m. UK time, and we're going to be joined by Jason Hans from Microsoft, and our focus then is going to be site reliability engineering. So we're going to dig a little bit more into some of the changes that are happening there. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you to everyone who was watching as well. And I will see you on the next episode of the ITSM Crowd. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.